division. We're going to start things off with the Atlantic Division. We've got some writers here, contributors from the Hockey Writers covering Montreal. We've got somebody here from Toronto. We'll take a look at the whole division as a whole, kind of let everybody know what's going on. So I'm just going to sort of walk around. We've got two covering here from Montreal. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, talk about what you might be working on, and then we'll kind of have a brief discussion about the whole division. Trege, I'll start with you. Let everybody know who you are, where they can find you, where they can follow your work, and what you're working on right now.
Trege Wilson. I'm Trege Wilson _THW on Twitter. I write for the Hockey Writers. I'm also co-host of Habs Unfiltered with my partner down there, Blain Potvin. And right now I'm working on an article. Kent Hughes, the GM for the Montreal Canadiens, at a presser today, basically pretty much outlined his plan for the trade deadline. So he came up and they asked him a bunch of questions about Carey Price, about who might be next, who's on the block. And he pretty much said that he's not sure about Price's future, but he is not in the market to acquire another goaltender. Jake Allen's back and healthy. He'll be playing tonight against Dallas. So they have Montembeault and Hammond on IR, but so they're pretty happy with the way the goaltending is, at least for the rest of the year, depending on how Price is going to be, I guess, going into next season or the end of this year. He also mentioned, which was a surprise to me, that Brett Kulak will not be dealt. Or they have no plans to deal Brett Kulak is what he said. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm sure if the right price. Now, that could go either way. Either Brett Kulak didn't get the offer they were looking for, isn't getting the offers that they want from Brett Kulak, or they plan on re-signing Brett Kulak for next season. They are going to be short right-handed defense going into next year, and Kulak can play both sides. So that's a possibility. And basically he just said anyone else is available for the right price. To me, I think Lekkonen's a guy that people are really calling upon. And if that's the case, and if the rumor of the first and the prospect is true, maybe a little too high for some teams for a bottom six player. But if you look at Blake Coleman or Blake Goodrow from last year, they both got first round players when they were traded. So, or first round draft picks when they were traded. So other than that, that's the article I'm working on. And that's kind of his little dip into what he might be doing for the rest of the trade deadline. They also have a few UFAs. Matthew Perreault just went through waivers, but he's also been talking to the GM about his future in Montreal. And now that he cleared, it could be easier for them to trade him. And then you also have Cedric Paquette down in Laval. And I think that's it, unless Blain got someone else that comes to mind. But I think that's it for the UFAs for Montreal.
Well, before we ask Blain to follow up on that, I'm going to ask you, just based on it, because from what I gathered from that press conference today, it sounds like there's a little bit a lack of activity. Maybe there's a lot of talk that maybe Montreal was going to be one of the bigger and busier teams this year selling, but it sounds like a lot of what we were expecting to happen out of Montreal might not happen. Does that surprise you based on the way that press conference went this morning?
No, not really, because I got a feeling a few weeks ago that I didn't think they'd be that busy at this trade deadline. The Foley went, almost a month ago now? So it's almost like, and then Sherratt, we all knew Sherratt was going to get traded. That was no secret and no surprise. But I think the issue is Hughes and Gorton have a certain criteria of who they want back and what they want back. And if they're not going to get it, they're not going to make the move. They're just not going to make a trade to make a trade. I'm not surprised. I still think there might be a player or two moving, but it's not going to be as busy for Montreal as people had thought. You're absolutely right. Everyone thought at first Montreal would be trading left, right, and center, and everyone would be going. But I think it's going to be quite quiet from now on for the Montreal Canadiens.
So I'll ask you one quick question before we move on here and take 10, 15 seconds to answer. Were you surprised by the return for Ben Sherratt?
No, I thought they got exactly what they were looking for. They wanted the first round pick. I'm surprised it was Florida. I'll tell you that. I thought he was going to go to the West Coast. I thought he was going to go to St. Louis or Calgary. The B-level prospect, I think, was in there because of the first round pick. If they were going to Calgary saying Peltier, I don't think you would have saw a first round coming back. The force surprised me. I thought that was added bonus. But the new guy, Similac or whatever you say his name. Apparently he has NHL skating, and he's pretty good with the puck. He's good with his body. He's a bit lanky, but he looks like he's going to be not a bad bottom six player in the NHL. So I thought they got a good return for it.
I was a little surprised it was Florida too. I was not thinking it'd be Calgary. Just after the Toffoli stuff, when we'd heard that he might go in that deal, then it didn't really happen because the ask was too much. I just don't usually see teams revisiting trade talks and making those two things work out. So I wasn't really ever thinking Calgary would be in it, but I was a little surprised it was Florida, even though we all knew that they wanted to make a move, just that they gave up so much and were willing to do the deal. So Blain, what about you? I mean, you can follow up a little bit on Montreal here. What are you hearing? What are you do you expect anything else to happen here for the Canadiens?
Yeah, like Trege. I mean, I watched the press conference as well, and in both French and English, Hughes made it very clear he has set prices. He's assessed what he has, and he is not going to sell just for the sake of selling. Now, on Kulak, unless he is signed to a contract before the deadline, I feel like he's going to get moved. So if there's not an announcement that he's being signed, he's likely traded because they're not going to just let a guy walk away. It would be a waste of an asset. And that doesn't seem to be something that Hughes or Gorton would be open to doing. I've had a little bit of work. I've done a little bit of work on Lehkonen and what his value is based on, as mentioned by Trege, Goudreau and Coleman. So that's the kind of expectation. If he's the next big piece that I would expect to move, if there's a big piece to move.
Yeah, no, I've heard that there's a lot of interest in Lehkonen from around the league, and it's just a matter of whether or not people are going to be able to pay or willing to pay the price to acquire him. Let me ask you this, Blaine. Do you think that the strategy that Ken Hughes is taking and the speculation and rumors that he's probably going to hit this offseason and dip into the free agency market, does this really scream a retool more than it screams any sort of inclination at a rebuild?
Yeah, he mentioned it today. He's not doing a fire sale, so it's not a rebuild as people would expect it to be. It's more of a renovation. So being a player in the free agent market, he's going to have to move a few players out of the way. He's got to make some space on the salary cap, move Weber's contract out. I would expect Petrie to be moved in the summer around draft time. If he wants to be a player in the free agent market, he needs money. And without that movement, he will have no money.
Don't be surprised.
Sorry,
I was just going to say, don't be surprised if Weber's contract's not traded near the trade deadline either.
I was just going to ask that question. Yeah. Do you think if that's something, I could see Petrie being a summer deal. I know that we've heard Josh Anderson's name and Brendan Gallagher's name, and I can't imagine those things are all that serious. But if you're moving money out to go and get money to buy, maybe that's a player you have to, but that's not going to happen for the deadline. But I was wondering if you guys thought Weber's contract would be one of those things we should really watch for. And do you see a team really open to it? Like, would it be Arizona? Is that the natural fit there? So we think
right now, from Elliot Friedman recently is Arizona's kicking tires on that. So it would make sense if they did. They have the space under the cap now to take him on, and you have to have that amount of money to take on that contract. So it's not teams near the cap ceiling that would be able to do it. Arizona could do it. And it would make sense for them, seeing as how they're moving into an arena that's smaller than my beer league arena. And they're going to need to hit the cap floor some way without spending the money. So they make sense.
Yeah. Arizona's always in that conversation when it comes to trying to get some money that it's on the books, but not, on the ice, usually, so to speak, right? Let's switch gears a little bit. Peter's with us too. He covers the Toronto Maple Leafs. A couple other tidbits for some other teams when he does his podcast. But Peter, go ahead and introduce yourself. Let everybody know where they can find you and what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so you can find me at PBARACCHINI on Twitter. And I did do quite a bit of, pre-scouting or pre-trade deadline talks before about how, a certain name like Travis Dermott could be made for available where there's a prospect of like money out to get more assets in. His contract's up for another year, I believe. Still valuable and a young defenseman that, teams could look at. I also looked at because there's so many, possibilities with the Maple Leafs. They also try to acquire maybe a top 6 forward. I've gone maybe the third time to Connor Garland. I wrote last year how the Maple Leafs were kicking tires around him at the deadline. They went with Nick Foligno, and then they addressed it again in the offseason. So I thought maybe Connor Garland would probably be on their radar this time around. And Of course, there was a whole issue at the beginning of the season with the right-handed defense situation. They went out, they got Ilya Lyubushkin from the Arizona Coyotes, where they traded away Nick Ritchie's contract again, a team that just wanted to try and accrue money and assets for the future. And it's working out well for both sides. Nick Ritchie starting to score. Lyubushkin is, being a very solid two-way kind of player for the Maple Leafs at this point, getting some top-line minutes recently with Morgan Riley. And yeah, that's basically what I've worked on in the past, and obviously working on the coverage when news breaks on Monday. So hopefully everything goes according to plan, because Hurdle signed. Wasn't really too happy about that, because I was hoping to have something written up on him. And now there's the prospect of Jacob Chychrun not moving as well because of the high price. So it's looking to be a very eventful, trade deadline for the next few days.
Okay, so let me ask you two questions, and one of them is sort of related to this Montreal conversation about how maybe inactive they might be.
Mm-hmm.
What about Toronto? Now, everybody thinks Toronto's going to be active all the time. That's just the way that the talk goes. The conversation tends to surround Toronto in a lot of these things. But there's also some talk that they might not do anything, that they have very little cap space in which to work. Well, now they might be the one team in the NHL who can work that salary cap better than anybody else. Yeah. But do you think that Toronto does a lot, or do you think they do way less than people are expecting that they might do before Monday?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because, they're looking to try and improve in all three situations. The goaltending most recently came into question with the play of Jack Campbell, but then his rib injury. Peter Mrazek hasn't lived up to expectations with his $3.8 million. So on top of wanting to add defense, a top six forward, they now got to worry about goaltending and how they're going to address this situation. So, I mean, they are rumored in for quite a few names. I mean, Mark Giordano comes to mind. I know that Hampus Lindholm from the Anaheim Ducks are at the top of their list as well. But given the recent asking price for Lindholm, which is, a top prospect, a first, and another asset going to Anaheim, don't think the Maple Leafs are willing to make that kind of commitment, especially for rental, and especially if they're trying to sign him long term. I don't know if even that's going to be possible, because we all saw what happened with Nick Foligno last year. Kyle Dubas maybe wants to try and make a deal, but at the same time, he's very reserved at how far he's going to go. We mentioned how much he loves players with term, especially with a cheap contract. And, given the fact that Giordano is at the top of their list right now, it does kind of make sense. Obviously, their team that can work around the cap, try and find a third team in to try and retain salary on Giordano's contract as well. It's because that there's so many needs right now for the Maple Leafs that we didn't think that it would come up to this point, especially with goaltending. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. And I think if they make one move, I think everything will fall into place. And I think that all rests on if Eric Shalgren recently can, stop the bleeding with the goaltending in the backup situation. And if he plays well during the stretch in the short term, maybe that makes Peter Mrazek expendable. You can move that contract out, and then it opens up room for more moves in the future.
Well, that's super short term, because he's played one game. Right?
Yeah,
at this point,
very
how do you really
sample.
know what this guy's going to be able to do?
Yeah.
Like, he had a fantastic game, I'll tell you that much. But man, I wouldn't want to be making any major decisions based on one hockey game. So it'll be very interesting. So I have one more question for you, though. If they can only do one thing, so if Toronto has one move, and there's a lot of talk about that priority, what it is between the goaltending situation, the defense, and adding another forward, what do you think they focus on, if they focus on only one thing?
I think they're leaning more towards defense. I mean, we saw with all the names that they're linked to, and even before then, there were also talks about possibly Josh Manson, but he was on their no trade list. Calvin DeHaan has come up. We saw what they did with Lyubushkin to shore up that right-hand side. But if they were going for a left-handed defenseman, I think, Giordano is going to be at the top of their list. The goaltending situation is really tough, because there's only one or two big names. Maybe if you want to throw in Braden Holtby, but Marc-Andre Fleury is going to be the prize. And it's going to be really difficult, especially if you're the Maple Leafs, to try and bring in that contract or have Chicago eat salary. It's going to be a big price to pay. And again, Kyle Dubas is going to be very wary about that for rental players. I think that if you could shore up your defense, it'll make life difficult for, Jack Campbell for when he returns. And we know we've seen him struggle, but he has shown to be a capable starter early on in the season where, the team wasn't that great in front of him, but he was playing extremely well in the crease. So if they're able to get one more body on the fence and solidify that, and maybe not rely so much on youngsters like Rasmus Sandin or Timothy Liljegren, but maybe even move out a key piece like Travis Dermott to bring somebody else in, I think that's going to be what they're going to aim for come deadline day. And if they manage to get a top 6 forward instead, I think it's going to be priority B. But I think maybe defense is going to be up their alley. Maybe even I know they're scouting Florida and Nashville today, and not Florida, Philadelphia and Nashville. Sorry. Maybe they're linked to Justin Braun as well, another guy that can step up, be a solid stay-at-home guy, get in the lanes, block shots, but even have some mobility to this game. So I think that's going to be up their alley.
Yeah, I could see Justin Braun being in that conversation. I know the Oilers are looking at him too. Okay, so Treg, I'll start with you as we round out this topic of conversation with the Atlantic Division. Is there another team that you're looking at? So outside of Montreal, is there a team in this division that you're watching for specifically to make some waves, to do something here before the deadline?
I think the Boston Bruins are going to try to make a few moves to solidify their playoff spot and maybe even try to leapfrog Toronto in the top 3. Boston was a team at the first year I thought would take a step backwards, and they kind of didn't. They kind of sputtered for a little bit, but then they hit their groove and came up. Swayman's and Allmark have been playing well in nets for them, but I think they really need to shore up their defense, and I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to go out and try to make some moves to tighten up and maybe get some secondary scoring to help out the Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand line. Other than that, I mean, Tampa Bay's Tampa Bay. They'll put Kucherov on IR and see how much money they can bring in after that. And I mean, Tampa Bay has the team already. I don't think they really need to move anything. Florida has made their moves. So yeah, I think Boston's the team to watch at trade deadline to see what they're going to do. And it's been pretty quiet about Boston too. You haven't really heard too many rumors about people going to Boston. So
yeah, I think they might be upset if this Jacob Chikrin thing is really not happening. They might be one of the teams that we're probably looking at them. And I don't know if Florida's done. I'm not sure. Like, I don't know if they got $1 million to spend, get another, but I just have a feeling that they're not done, but well, maybe not. Blain, I never asked you where people can follow you. So I'll get you to promote yourself first, and then I'll let you talk about what team you're looking at. Okay.
Blain Potvin on Twitter, Instagram. You can find me at Habs Unfiltered on TikTok. Habs Unfiltered as well. I co-host the podcast with Trege. So that's a full-time job, keeping him in line.
But with a shirt like that, how do you not know who the rowdy one in the room is, right?
Pretty much.
That's right. Go ahead. Which team are you looking at there?
Well, I think, like you mentioned, I don't think Florida's done. There's still quite a lot of chatter about them going after Claude Giroux. That might happen. If it does, they're my favorite for the division. If not, Boston is another, like Treg mentioned, I think they're going to be going for defense. And if they do leapfrog Toronto, I think that does a favor to Toronto, because if Toronto ends up as a wild card, they'll end up playing someone in the Metro more than likely. And that would be Carolina, and they match up well against them. They do not match up well against anybody else in their division, because all the other teams in the playoff spots in the Atlantic right now are too gritty. They're too tested, too experienced, and Toronto just doesn't have enough spine.
I think shots fired here, but I'm gonna.
Oh, I agree. I do agree in the sense that, Toronto does play that high tempo, high offensive game. They don't have enough physicality except for what they brought in with Lyubushkin. I mean, we saw Matthews' temper start to flare and the emotions start to come out with the Heritage Classic. But other than that, yeah, you really don't have enough players to step up when they need to. And I know they have Wayne Simmons, but he really hasn't stepped up when they needed to. Jake Muzzin is injured, who can be a physical force. But yeah, the intensity does intensify in the playoffs. There's no doubt about that. And I think Toronto may be outmatched, but then again, the speed game has shown to be a factor for them this season at times. So will be interesting to see who will be the ideal matchup.
Okay, to close things off, Peter, is there a team you're watching? Is there somebody that you're looking at outside of Toronto?
Yeah, I'm looking, well, not really a playoff team, but I'm looking at the Detroit Red Wings. Given the fact that, they're slowly starting to fall in the standings after a really great start. We're seeing the play of, Mort Seider and Lucas Raymond being really great, but now they still need to prepare for the future. I mean, they still need to bring in assets. They're still in a rebuilding phase. Recently, it was just reported that they're trying to sit Nick Leddy. Maybe they got a deal in place for him. He's a valuable asset for them. He can bring in a really great return. And also, I saw rumors of like a price or the possibility of Tyler Bertuzzi moving. He could bring in a really great return. And again, I'm not sure about the whole COVID-19 vaccination situation with other teams, but if there's a team willing to take him on, I mean, he's still really gritty goal scoring forward that was still providing a lot of upside to the team's top six. So definitely going to bring in a first and a top prospect for them. So that's who I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah, Bertuzzi to me would be the guy who moves that was mentioned to be moved, but be the most surprising move of the deadline. I don't imagine that happens, but we shouldn't be shocked because it's out there, right?
Yeah.
So who knows? For me, the team to watch is probably Ottawa, only because Pierre Dorian mentioned that he wants his phone to ring. Like he publicly came out and said, no one's calling me. What's going on? So I think when he did that, he probably put everybody on notice like, hey guys, I'm like interested in doing something here. So for me, they'll be sellers obviously, but I do believe that they might be that surprise team that sort of sneaks in there and gets a little active when we're all kind of forgetting that they're over there, right? And that they're ready to do some business, and we'll see. That's going to do it for the Atlantic division though, guys. Thanks for Trege, Blain, Peter. I appreciate you guys coming on, talking about your division, talking about your teams. It'll be a very interesting deadline, and maybe we'll get the chance to chat after it's over, just to take a look at your teams and what they did.